is justly named Forward by Starets Nokodimos. This book, which profits the soul, is justly named Unseen Warfare. Many holy and divinely inspired books of the Old and New Testaments have received their titles from the subjects they deal with. For instance, Genesis is so called because it tells of the creation and right ordering of all existence out of non existence. Exodus because it describes the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt. Leviticus because it contains the sacred statutes for the Levites. The Book of Kings because they tell of the lives and activities of kings. The Gospels because they bring good tidings of great joy, for unto you is born a Savior, which is Christ the Lord, and show to all a sure way to salvation and the inheritance of life in eternal bliss. Therefore, who will dispute that the title of this book should be Unseen Warfare, according to its content and the subjects it deals with? For it teaches not the art of visible and sensory warfare, and speaks not about visible bodily foes, but about the unseen and inner struggle which every Christian undertakes from the moment of his baptism, when he makes a vow to God to fight for him to the glory of his divine name, even unto death. It is of this warfare that the book of Numbers speaks allegorically. Wherefore it is said in the book of the wars of the Lord. It speaks of invisible and incorporeal foes, which are the varied passions and lusts of the flesh, and of the evil demons who hate men and never cease to fight against us, day and night, as the divine Paul says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. This book teaches that the warriors who take part in this unseen war are all who are Christians, and their commander is our Lord Jesus Christ, surrounded and accompanied by his marshals and generals, that is, by all the hierarchies of angels and saints. The arena, the field of battle, where the sight takes place and the fight actually happens, is in our own heart and all our inner man. The time of battle is our whole life. With what weapons are warriors armed for this unseen warfare? Listen, their helmet is total disbelief in themselves and complete absence of self reliance. Their shield and coat of mail, a bold faith in God and a firm trust in Him. Their armor and cuirass, instruction in the passion of Christ. Their belt, cutting off bodily passions. Their boots, humility and a constant sense of recognition of their powerlessness. Their spurs, patience in temptations and repudiation of negligence. Their sword, which they hold ever in one hand, is prayer, whether with the lips or within in the heart. Their three-pronged spear, which they hold in the other hand, is a firm resolve in no way to consent to the passion which assails them, but to repulse it with anger and wholehearted hatred. Their pay and food, sustaining them in their resistance to the enemy, is frequent communion with God, both through the mystery of the Holy Eucharist and inwardly. The clear and cloudless atmosphere, which enables them to see the enemy from afar, is a constant exercising of the mind and the knowledge of what is right in the eyes of the Lord, and a constant exercising of the will in desiring only what is pleasing to God, peace, and quiet of the heart. It is here in this unseen warfare, that is, in this book, or rather in the quote unquote wars of the Lord, that Christ's warriors learn to discern the various forms of prelist, the different wiles, the incredible subterfuges and military rouges which our invisible foes use against us through the senses, through fantasy, through loss of the fear of God, and in particular through the four suggestions which they introduce into the heart at the moment of death. I mean suggestions of unbelief, despair, vainglory, and of the demons themselves assuming the aspect of angels of light. But in learning to discern all this, men learn at the same time how to frustrate these wiles of the enemy and to resist them. They learn how to find out what tactical moves to make and what laws of war they must follow in each particular case, and the courage needed to enter into battle. In brief, I would say that every man who desires salvation will learn through this book how to conquer his invisible foes in order to acquire the treasure of true and divine virtues and to be rewarded with an incorruptible crown and a token of eternity, which is union with God both in this life and in the future.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. America's asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA.
They're making a movie about you.
About me, obviously.
Yeah, he's Dora. I'm just Boots.
I mean, I know all your old moves. I call that the go away, you. What are you even talking about, Elijah Wood?
First of all, he looks like me. Hey, I'm 3 days older.
Reggie's smarter than he looks or sounds,
Books are brain movies.
or usually acts.
How has everyone been handling farting on camera? Because I've been going into the woods.
Reggie Dinkins, new Monday on NBC and Peacock.
So, Christ loving readers, accept this book graciously and gladly, and learning from it the art of unseen warfare, strive not merely to fight, but to fight according to the law, to fight as you should, so that you may be crowned. For according to the apostle, if a man also strives for masteries, yet he is not crowned, except he strive lawfully. Arm yourselves, as this book shows you how, so as to strike down your inner and invisible foes, which are the soul destroying passions, and their originators and instigators, the demons. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Remember how at holy baptism you vowed to renounce Satan and all his works, all service of him and all his pride, that is, love of lust, love of glory, love of money, and other passions. So strive with all your might to turn him back, to put him to shame, and to overcome him with every perfection. And what of the rewards which await you in this victory? They are many and great. Hear of them from the lips of the Lord himself, who makes you this promise in the holy revelation. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. He that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna. And he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations, and I will give him the morning star. He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment. I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God. To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. See what gifts! See what rewards! See this eightfold, many-colored, incorruptible crown, or rather, these crowns prepared for you, brethren, if you overcome the devil. So now, take up this aim, take up this work, and abstain from all things, that no man take thy crown. For it is indeed most shameful that those who compete in games, in physical and external feats of valor, abstain from all things 5 times more strictly in order to get a perishable wreath of wild olive, or of palm, or fig, or laurel, or myrtle, or of some other plant. But you, who can receive an incorruptible crown, spend your life in negligence and carelessness. Cannot even the word of St. Paul make you awake from your sleep when he says, Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? So run that ye may obtain. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. If inspired by zeal you gain this victory and this radiant crown, do not forget, my brethren, to pray the Lord for the remission of sins of him who had helped you to acquire such blessing by means of this book. But above all, do not forget to raise your eyes
Okay, I'm Unseen Warfare, and we're back. And, I kind of just was playing the audiobook for Unseen Warfare. So if you're interested in what that little intro was, that's what that was. Hello, Denise. See there. So I got an article I want to pull up. So I'm going to go to that first. It's right here. Here's our article. Let's see how that looks. Yeah. So that's what our article says. Freemasonry, Ecumenism, and the 2020 American Revolution, written by Vladimir Moss. During the 18th century, in spite of the spread of Enlightenment ideas, the old despotic order still reigned in Europe, and with rulers such as Frederick the Great in Prussia and Catherine the Great in Russia, turning in practice against the Enlightenment ideas they embraced in theory, it was clear that the, quote, mystery of iniquity needed a new stimulus to recover its momentum and propel it towards its goal. That stimulus came in the form of an element already well known to European history, but which only now began to acquire a dominant position in politics. Jewish power. One major channel of Jewish influence was finance. A second was Freemasonry, which, because of its close links with Jewry, is often called Judeo-Masonry. Okay, so what I'm going to do, just for anybody who wants, I can get this link here. And there we go. Just in case anybody wants a link. So, alright. Here we go. The main target of the Masons were the hierarchical principle, respect for tradition, the church, and the monarchy. They did not originate the attacks on these. The roots of anti-authoritarianism in both church and state go back at least to the 11th century papacy. What they did do was use an already existing skeptical and rationalist climate of opinion to intensify and give direction to the revolutionary movement, quote, the mystery of iniquity. Since belief in the existence of a Masonic conspiracy against civilization is often taken as evidence of madness, or at any rate a political incorrectness, it is necessary to assert from the beginning that, as L.A. Tikhomarov rightly says, quote, it is strange to attribute to the Masons the whole complexity of the evolution of human societies. One must not have the idea that people live happily in a healthy state, but then the Masonic organization appeared and corrupted them all. It is necessary to know the laws of development of societies, which be such as they are. If the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem had never taken place, in general, the study of Masonry can be fruitful only on condition that it is conducted scientifically. Only such a study is capable of clarifying the true level of influence of this or that secret society on the evolution of peoples and states, end quote. While Tikhomarov has no doubts about the existence of the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy, he nevertheless insists that the blame for the destruction of society lies, quote, most of all, not on some premediately evil influence of the Masons or whatever other organization, but on the false direction of our own constructive activities. For, quote, there has never been a man or a society which has not been corrupted through his own free will. In other words, the Masons would have no power over society if society had not voluntarily abandoned its own defensive principles and institutions. As Archpriest Lev Lebedov writes, quote, in evaluating the role of the Jewish core of world Masonry, two extremes are possible: the complete denial of any Judeo-Masonic secret plot and secret leadership of the world processes, and the extreme exaggeration of the degree and size of this leadership, when it seems that they are everywhere and everything is ruled by them. In fact, it is not at all like that. The life of the world, even the development of its scientific, technical, and industrial civilization, is a very weird and changeable combination of elemental, ungovernable processes and planned governable processes. In the final analysis, everything is truly ruled by the providence of God, but in such a way that the free will of man is not abolished. For that reason, in their successful moments, it can seem and seems to the Judeo-Masons, who really are striving for ever greater subjection of the process of global life to themselves, that to an ever greater degree it is by their own human powers that everything is achieved. Some have seen the origins of Masonry as far back as the Babylonian exile, when the Pharisees were forced to use what came to be called Masonic symbols, gestures, and handshakes in order to communicate with each other. Since there is next to no hard evidence for this, we shall not discuss it, nor any of the other theories of the very origins of Freemasonry. According to Masonic theory, free speculative or, quote, symbolic masonry began when the meeting places or lodges of the, quote, operative masons, the stones masons who built the medieval cathedrals, gradually began to decline in importance with the decline in their craft, and they were joined by intellectuals who used the lodges for their own intellectual and often heretical or occult activities. One of the first modern, quote, speculative masons was the English antiquarian and astrologer Elias Ashmore, who was initiated in 1646 and died in 1692. And another early Mason was Sir Christopher Wren and Christopher Hodap. A Mason writes, quote, the Great London Fire had destroyed much of the city of London in 1666, and rebuilding it took decades. Freemason Christopher Wren had designed an astonishing number of the new buildings, and construction projects were everywhere. One of the biggest was the rebuilding of St. Paul's Cathedral. It started in 1673 and took almost 40 years to complete. Operative Masons came from all over England to work on the project, and many joined the Lodge of St. Paul. By 1710, the great cathedral was complete, and many lodges disbanded as Masons returned to their hometowns. By 1715, there were just 4 London city lodges left. Even at this very early stage, Masonry aroused suspicion. Thus, in 1698, a certain Mr. Winter circulated a leaflet in London warning, quote, all godly people in the city of London as the mischiefs and evil practiced in the sight of God by those called Freemasons. For this devilish sect of men are meters in the secret, which swear all against all without their following, that they are the Antichrist, which is to come, leading men from fear of God. The traditional official birthday of Masonry ends July 24th, 1717, when the 4 remaining London lodges met in a pub in St. Paul's churchyard and created a great lodge as their ruling center. The first Grand Master was a nobleman, and the leader of English Masonry to the present day have tended to be members of the royal family. Consonant with this royal connection, there was nothing revolutionary in a political sense in early English Masonry. Thus, when Dr. James Anderson, a Presbyterian minister and master of Lodge No. 17 of London, drew up the Constitutions of Masonry in 1723, great emphasis was laid on the Masons' loyalty to king and country. Quote, A Mason is a Mason. A Mason is a peaceable subject to the civil powers, wherever he resides or works, and is never to be concerned in the plots and conspiracies against the peace and welfare of the nation. If a brother should be a rebel against the state, he is not to be countenanced in his rebellion, however he may be pitied as an unhappy man, and if convicted of not other crime, though brotherhood must and ought to dismiss his rebellion, and give no umbrage or ground or political jealousy to the government for the time being, they cannot expel him from the lodge, and his relations remaining indefeasible. The Masons, writes O.F. Soliev, called themselves, quote, men of goodwill, peace lovers, builders of the future, just construction of society, and at the same time patriots of their own fatherlands, law-abiding subjects and citizens, as is emphasized in all constitutional documents. They went towards the highest ideals not through the preaching of abstract truths, but by serving their own peoples. They did not wall themselves off by invisible walls from the compatriots, but completely shared their destiny with all their woes and sufferings. They were distinguished by striving to help those around them, to draw a middle line between extremes, introduce any kind, rate a little humanism into the balance of war that had been inevitable upon now. That was the theory. But in the order's secrecy, in the religiosity of its 3 degrees, and in its subversive political influence, a great danger to the powers that be was in fact present. And in 1736, Pope Clement, so what is that? The 12th, anathematized it. Moreover, quote, it was gradually revealed that it is the ritual humility of symbolical masonry has ceased to satisfy the leaders of the obediences, scions of the ruling dynasties and nobility who strove to elaborate the inner decoration of the lodges, and especially the rituals. The desired basis for reform was found in the specially transformed legend of the fate of the knightly order of the Templars, whose leader de Molay and his fellows had perished on the gallows in Paris in 1517, in accordance with the Inquisitor's false accusations of a terrible heresies. The Templars began to be portrayed as the immediate forerunners of the Freemasons, which required the introduction of several higher degrees into their order to signify the special merits and great knowledge of individually chosen adepts. One of the initiators of the reform, the Scottish nobleman A. Ramsay, declared in 1737, quote, our forefathers, the Crusaders, wanted to unite into one brotherhood all the subjects of all states, so as in time to create a new people, which represents many nations, would unite them in the bonds of virtue and science. After the introduction of several higher degrees with the luxurious rituals, a series of associations formed several systems, including a highly centralized system of strict observance with rigorous discipline for its adepts that was significantly developed in the German lands in Russia and Sweden. And so, within 20 years of its official birthday, Masonry had developed from a talking shop for liberal intellectuals into a new religion tracing its roots to the Templars and beyond. This reinforced suspicions about its anti-Christian nature. At this point, however, the noble membership of the order proved useful. The Masons were saved from persecution by their success in recruiting members from aristocracy, whose names were immediately published to show how, quote, respectable Masonry was. Moreover, a ban was placed on political discussions in English lodges. It was emphasized that, as Anderson's constitutions put it, quote, a Mason is a peaceable subject to the civil power wherever he resides or works, and is never to be concerned in the plots and conspiracies against the peace and welfare of the nation. But if English Masonry by and large respected this ban, this was certainly not to be the case with its dangerous lodges in Europe and America. Thus, St. Andrew Lodge in Boston became a, quote, hotbed of sedition at the time of the American Revolution. Moreover, the constitutions clearly witness both to Masonry's revolutionary potential and to its religious nature. Its religiosity is particularly obvious when, in one and the same breath, they both disclaim any interest in religion and then claim to profess, quote, the best religion that ever was or will be, can be, the true primitive Catholic universal religion, agree to be so in all times and ages. What is this religion? In some formulations, it is like the deism that was becoming fashionable in England and America, in which God, the, quote, great architect of the universe, is seen as creating and activating the laws of nature, and then playing no further part in history. In others, it is closer to pantheism. Thus, the Constitution declares, quote, Masons are obliged to that religion in which all men agree, leaving their particular opinions to themselves, that is to be good men and true, of men of honor and honesty by whatever denominations or persuasions they may be distinguished, whereby Masonry became the center of union and the means of consolidating true friendship among persons that have remained at a perpetual distance. The religion we profess is the best that ever was, or will be, or can be, for it is the law of nature. Which is the law of nature? For God is nature. It is to love God above all things, and the neighbor as ourself. This is true, primitive, Catholic, and universal religion agreed to be in all times and ages. God is nature. This is clearly pantheism, and no amount of Christian terminology can disguise that fact, but this Masonic God, as revealed in one of the degrees of initiation, is also personal. He is Jubalan, a mixture of Jehovah, Baal, and the Canaanite god On. Moreover, closer examination revealed Masonry in its developed form to be a kind of Manichaean dualism. There are two gods, Christ and Satan, of whom the one Christ is hated and the other Satan is adored, as the famous American Mason Albert Pike wrote, quote, to the crowd we must say we worship a God, but as to God one adores without superstition. To you, sovereign grand inspectors general, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, the 31st, and the 30th degrees. All of us initiates of the high degree should maintain the Masonic religion in the purity of Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians, whose deeds prove his cruelty, perfidy, and hatred of man, his barbarism and repulsion for science, would Adonai and his priests culminate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately Adonai is also God. Religious philosophy in its purity and youth consists in the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. Quote, we have the testimony, writes Tikhomorov, quote, of the former Mason and investigator of Masonry, Kopin Albencelli, whom we can in no way suspect of making up things when he declares positively that he had genuine documents about this in his hands. I, he says, had the opportunity several years ago to find a proof that there exist certain Masonic societies which are satanic societies, not in the sense that the devil used to come personally preside at their meetings, as the charlatan Leo Taxel says, but in the sense that their members confess the cult of Satan. They adore Lucifer as being supposedly the true God and are inspired by the irreconcilable hatred against the Christian God. They even have a special formula casting curses on him and proclaiming the glory and love for Lucifer. End quote. When we examine the rites and the religious practices of Masonry, and especially of its higher degrees, a strongly Jewish element is immediately apparent. An example, let us take the Masonic practice of the wearing aprons. Michael Hoffman, following John L. Brooke, writes, quote, the Babylonian Talmud claims that the forbidden tree in the garden from which Adam ate was a fig. Rabbi Nehemiah holds that the tree of which Adam ate was a fig tree. B.T. Berakoth 40a. The Kabbalah teaches that the leaves of the fig tree conveyed powers of sorcery and magic. Zohar 1:56b Bereshit. Consequently, in the rabbinic mind, the aprons worn by Adam and Eve, being made from the leaves of the fig tree, were garments that gave the wearers magic powers. These aprons made from fig leaves had the power to give the bearer to enjoy the fruits of the world to come. It is with this rabbinic understanding that Freemasons and Mormons wear these aprons in their own rituals. Moreover, there is a significant personal input of jewelry into Masonry, especially at the highest levels, for 3 symbolical degrees of Masonry are supplemented by 30 higher degrees, which in turn are crowned by which have been called, quote, invisible Masonry, end quote. All this impenetrably dark power is crowned according to the convictions and affirmations of Copen Abincelli by still another level, the Jewish Center, which pursues the aims of the universal lordship of Israel, and it holds in its hands both the visible Masonry, which is 33 degrees, and the invisible degrees of invisible Masonry, or Illuminism. Quote, it is true, of course, writes Bernard Lazare, that there were Jews connected with Freemasonry from its birth, students of the Kabbalah, as is shown by certain rites which survive. It is probable, too, that in the years preceding the outbreak of the French Revolution, they entered into greater numbers that were ever into the councils of secret societies, becoming indeed themselves the founders of secret associations. There were Jews in the circle around Weishaupt, a Jew of Portuguese origin. Martinez de Pasquales established numerous groups of Illuminati in France, and gathered around him a large number of disciples whom he instructed in the doctrines of reintegration. The lodges which Martinez founded were mystic in character, whereas the other orders of Freemasonry were on the whole rationalistic in their teachings. There would be little difficulty in showing how these two tendencies worked in harmony, how Cazotti, Cagliostro, Martinez, St. Martin, the Comte de Saint-Germain, Eckarhausen worked practically in alliance with the Encyclopedists and Jacobins, and how both, in spite of their seeming hostility, succeeded in arriving at the same end, the undermining, namely, of Christianity. Quote, this too then would tend to show that though the Jews might very well have been active participants in the agitation carried out by secret societies, it was not because they were the founders of such associations, but merely because the doctrines of secret societies agreed so well with their own. Thus, according to Lazare, Freemasonry was not controlled by Jews. Whether we believe that or not, Judaism and Masonry had a great deal in common. Anti-Christianity, a taste for a Kabbalistic type of mysticism, revolutionary politics, and many members of Jewish blood. But this is only beginning. It is when one enters into the details of the rites, especially the rites of the higher degrees, that the resemblance become really striking. Quote, the connections are more intimate, wrote a Parisian Jewish review, quote, than one would imagine. Quote, the spirit of Freemasonry is that of Judaism in its most fundamental beliefs. It is an idea of Judaics in language and is Judaic. It is very organizational, almost is Judaic. Whenever I approach the sanctuary where the Masonic order accomplishes its work, I hear the name of Solomon ringing everywhere and echoes of Israel. Thus, symbolic columns are columns of the temple where each Hiram's workmen receive their wages. They enshrine his revered name. The whole Masonic tradition takes me back to the great epoch when the Jewish monarch, fulfilling David's promises, raised up the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a religious monument worthy of the center of heaven and earth, a tradition symbolized by powerful images which have spread outside the limits of Palestine to the whole world, but which still bear the indelible imprint of their origin. Quote, that temple which must be built, since the sanctuary in Jerusalem has perished, the secret edifice at which all Masons on earth labor with one mind, with a word of command and secret rallying points. It is the moral sanctuary, the divine asylum where all men who have been reconciled will reunite one day in holy and fraternal agapes. It is the social order which shall no longer have uh, fratricidal wars, nor castes, nor pariahs, and where the human race will recognize and proclaim anew its original oneness. That is the work of every initiate pledges in his devotion, and undertakes to lay his stone, a sublime work which has been carried on for centuries. Okay. This talk of universal fraternity is the rebuilding of the temple is deception. If there is fraternity, it is a Jewish fraternity. Quote, as for the final result of the Messianic Revolution, writes Batalt, quote, it will always be the same. God will overthrow the nations, and the kings will cause Israel and her king to triumph. And nations will be converted to Judaism and will obey the law, or else they be destroyed. And the Jews will be masters of the world. And the Jews and the international dream is to unite the world with the Jewish law, under the direction and domination of the priestly people, a general form of imperialism. The main aim of Freemasonry, as of Judaism, is rebuild the Temple of Solomon, and this alone should be enough to warn us of its anti-Christianity. Insofar, the Lord declared that, quote, not one stone of the temple shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. Matthew 24:2. Moreover, every attempt to rebuild it has been destroyed by the Lord, as happened when Julian the Apostate tried to rebuild it in the 4th century. The rites of Freemasonry themselves declare that the secret aim of rebuilding the temple to undo the work of Christ on the cross. Thus, the 18th, or the Rosicrucian Decree, speaks of the 9th hour of the day as, quote, the hour when the veil of the temple was rent in twain and darkness overspread the earth. When the true light departed from us, the altar was thrown down, the blazing star was eclipsed, the cubic stone poured forth blood and water. The word was lost, and despair and tribulation sat heavenly upon it. It goes to exhort the Masons, quote, since Masonry has experienced such dire calamities, it is our duty, princes, by renewed labors to retrieve our loss. The Reverend Walter Hanna justly comments, for any Christian to declare that Masonry experienced a dire calamity at the crucifixion, or that Masons suffered a loss at the triumph of the death of our Savior on the cross with the excellent and perfect Prince of the Rosicrucians of the Herodom can be their own labor retrieved, seems not only heretical but actually blasphemous. The only interpretation which seems to make sense of this passage would appear to be that it is not the death of our Lord which is mourned, but the defeat of Satan. Indeed, for the, quote, the eclipse of the blazing star can only mean the defeat of Satan, while the cubic stone pouring forth blood and water can only mean the triumph of Christ on the cross. Christ, who is, quote, the stone that the builders rejected, which became the chief cornerstone of the New Testament church, Matthew 21:42, having been rejected as, quote, the wrong shape by the leaders of old Israel. As the Apostle Peter said to the Sanhedrin, quote, thus Christ is the stone which was rejected by you builders, Jews, Masons, which has become the chief cornerstone. Acts 4:11. Any temple which does not have Christ as the chief cornerstone is an abomination to God and will be destroyed by him, just as the Old Testament temple was destroyed. For, quote, whoever falls on the stone will be broken, but on whoever it falls it will grind him to powder. Matthew 21:44. It is the same Rosicrucian decree that initiates are told to walk over the cross of Christ. And so Masonry is veiled as a web of deceit whose outer layers are liberalism, Zionism, and rationalism, whose inner layers are the overthrow of the existing world order in both church and state, and whose innermost sanctum is the most explicit anti-Christianity, the worship of Satan. That anti-Christianity is Jewish in origin, but with a significant admixture of Canaanite paganism is clear from the name of, quote, supreme architect, whose Mason worship Jubalan, Quote, Jah refers to Jehovah, but Baal and On refer to the gods of Canaanite idolatry. Bull is Baal, while the word On, sometimes falsely identified with the Egyptian Osiris, can actually be found in Hosea 4 and 15. Judah, do not go up to do not go up to Jagal, and do not go up to the house of On. Blessed Theodoret Osiris comments, quote, On is the name of the idol in Bethel. It does not mean eternal, that is, living, as some commentators imagine. Instead, it is a Hebrew word, not Greek. The other Hebrew-speaking translators clearly informed of this. Aquilia and Theodotion rendered it useless house, in Symmachus, quote, house of iniquity. For the Masonic God is in fact a blasphemous mixture of the name of the true God and the names of his great enemies, which shows that Masonry and ecumenism are intertwined at the deepest of levels. Indeed, we out here learning things, you know what I'm saying? We're out here learning. Hope everybody's all right. Getting back to it. Learning as usual. We're learning something crazy, you know, Freemasonry, ecumenism, and the title of the episode is Antichrist and Revolution. And we're kind of looking at some Antichrist aspects of Freemasonry, which is behind the World Revolutionary Movement, you know. And we're learning some interesting aspects that are going so on. So it says, so the Masonic God is in fact a blasphemous mixture of the name of the true God and the names of his greatest enemies, which show that Masonry and ecumenism are intertwined at the deepest level. The first power in the West clearly to see that the threat of Masonry to both church and state was the Vatican. Catholicism made no radical distinctions between English and French Masonry. In 1738, Masonry of all kinds was condemned by Pope Clement. What is that? The 12th? In 1751, by Benedict. In 1821, by Pius. Okay, so forth and so on. So he names a number of popes. The latter's bull, Humanum Genus, declared the Freemasons, quote, their ultimate aim is to uproot completely the whole religion and political order of the world. This will mean that the foundational laws of the new structure of society will be drawn from pure naturalism, end quote. The popes were right in this, but not, of course, in many other things, and yet they were powerless to stem the tide of naturalism and unbelief that was sweeping Europe on the eve of the French Revolution. Nor could the revolution planned by the Grand Orient of Paris be prevented by the Vatican, for the simple reason the Vatican has stated that the whole long process of apostasy herself, from papism to humanism to Protestantism, from deism to enlightenment and Freemasonry, and on into the still more bloody and blasphemous future, it all began in Rome when the first heretical popes broke away from the Orthodox Church and the Byzantine autocracy. The papacy was therefore compromised, and if deliverance from the rapid growth of Masonry was to come, it could only come from the Orthodox Church and that autocracy that now stood in the place of Byzantium, the third Rome of Russia. Of course, the Masons did not advertise their Satanism. Instead, they attracted themselves to the contemporary zeitgeist, which was indifferentism, of what we should now call ecumenism. As religious passions cooled in Europe after the end of the religious wars, the Masons took the lead in the preaching of religious tolerance, and many were deceived into thinking that they could be Christians and Masons at the same time. Ecumenism has deep roots in European paganism. In the sense that the Roman Empire was ecumenist, since it embraced all religions as long as they did not constitute a threat to the worship of the state. Thus, in the year 384, Symmachus, the pagan leader of the Roman Senate, wrote to the Emperor Theodosius the Great, appealing him to be tolerant towards the pagans because, as he said, many paths led to God. He chose the wrong emperor to appeal to because Saint Theodosius was the most anti-ecumenist of Christians who banned all pagan worship. As this excellent definition of the folly of ecumenism as understood by the Romans was given by Saint Leo the Great in the 5th century. Quote, Rome, though it ruled almost all nations, was enthralled by errors of them all, and seemed to itself to have to foster religion greatly because it rejected no falsehood. It was only the Christians and the Jews who did not accept the Roman thesis that all religions are to be respected. They asserted, by contrast, that, quote, all the gods of the pagans are demons, Psalms 95 and 5. The origins of ecumenism go back to Asia Minor in the 2nd century, to Apelles, a disciple of the heretic Marcion. As the Athonite elder Augustine writes, quote, Apelles, the head of the numerous sect, venerable both of his life or his age, wanted to undertake the pacification and unification of all the shoots of the heretic Marcion under a single rule and authority. With this aim, he exerted all his power to come into contact with all the leaders of the sects, but had to admit that it was impossible to persuade each sect to abandon its unreasonable dogmatic teaching and accept that of another. Having come away from his attempts at mediation with no fruit, he decided a bridge had to be built, a way of living together peaceably, or a mutual tolerance of each other with a single variety of faith. Starting from this point of view, he established an atheistic dogma of unity, which he had been called after him, the atheist dogma of Apelles, with the notorious slogan, we don't have to examine the matter thoroughly. Everyone can remain in his faith. For those who hope on the crucified one, he declared, will be saved so as long as they have found to have good works. Or to put it more simply, it is not at all necessary to examine the matter. The difference between us, but everyone else should retain from his convictions, because he declared those who hope on the crucified one will be saved so as long as they found to practice good works. It would be superfluous to explain that this atheistic dogma on Apelles was first formulated by the heretic Marcion himself, whom St. Polycarp, the disciple of the Apostle John, called the firstborn of Satan, and is entirely alien to the Christian. We Christians love the heterodox, and we long for a real and holy union with them. When they become sober and believe in the orthodox manner in our Lord Jesus Christ, abandoning their heretical and mistaken beliefs and the distorted image of Christ, Eusebius, atheist Jerusalem. Apelles' dogma was condemned at the Fifth Ecumenical Council, but reappeared at a later date. Thus, the 12th century Arab philosopher and doctor Averroes pleaded for a kind of union between Christians, Jews, and Muslims and pagans that was avidly discussed in Western scholastic circles. Again, the variant of Apollinism known as Unitism, that is, the union between Roman Catholicism and other forms of Christianity, appeared after the Schism of 1054. As the elder Augustine explains, quote, after the canonical cutting off of the Latins from the church as a whole in 1054, that is, after their definitive schism and anathematization, there was also the acceptance, or rather the application, of the atheistic dogma of Apelles. The Catholic Orthodox Church of Christ condemned the heresies of the Nestorians, Monophysites, Monothelites, and the Third and Fourth and Sixth Ecumenical Councils. It anathematized the heretics and their heretical teachings and declared that those who remain in the above-mentioned heresies to be excommunicate. The apostate Church of Rome took no account of the decisions of these ecumenical councils, but received into communion the unrepentant and condemned Nestorian, Monophysite, and Monothelite heretics, whom, without any formality, with only the recognition of the Pope as monarch of the Church, not only the heretics, but also many others after this, were received into communion with only the recognition of the monarchy of the blood-stained beast that presided in it. End quote. However, the Apollinarianism in its Modern ecumenism variety is a product of the Protestant Reformation. The Protestants rejected the idea of church as the quote, the pillar and ground of truth. That's 1 Timothy 3 and 15, and vaunted the power of the individual mind to find the truth independently of any church. This led to a proliferation of Protestant sects, which in turn led to attempts to achieve unity by agreeing on a minimum truth, which in truth led to the idea that all faiths are true, quote, in their own way. Thus, the Anglican settlement of the mid-16th century was a kind of Protestant union. The Anglican Church was allowed to retain some of the outward trappings of Catholicism, but without its central pivot, the papacy, which was replaced by obedience to the secular monarch as head of the Church. Being a politically motivated compromise from the beginning, Anglicanism has always been a partial to ever more comprehensive schemes of interchurch and interfaith union, and many leaders of the ecumenical movement in the 20th century were Anglicans. In 1614, there appeared the first modern ecumenists. This is George Calixtus, a man famous according to Elder Augustine, quote, for the breadth of knowledge and of his, what does this say? Irenic spirit in tackling various questions, including ecclesiastical ones. Propelled by the Spirit, he declared that there was no need, nor did he even seek the union of various churches. Nevertheless, he did demand their mutual recognition and retaining the reciprocal love through the reciprocal tolerance of manifold differences of each church. As religious passions cooled around Europe at the end of the 30-Year War, the Freemasons took the lead in preaching religious tolerance and indifference. The ecumenism of English Masonry was linked to the crisis of faith in the Anglican Church in the early 18th century, and in particular to the loss of faith in the unique truth and saving power of Christianity. Thus, in 1717, wrote William Palmer, quote, a controversy arose on occasions of writings of Holy Bishop of Bangor, in which he maintained that it was needless to believe in any kind of particular creed or to be united to any particular church, and that sincerity of our own persuasions of the correctness of our opinions, whether well or ill-founded, is sufficient. These doctrines were evidently calculated to subvert the necessity of believing the articles of the Christian faith and to justify all cases of schismatics or separatists from the church. The convocation seemed these opinions too mischievous that a committee was appointed to select propositions from Hoadley's books and to procure their censor. But before this trial could take place, the convocations was prorogued by an arbitrary exercise of the royal authority. Hardly coincidentally, in 1717, in the year in which Hoadley's heretical views were published, was the same year in which the Grand Lodge of England was founded, and we find a very similar doctrine enshrined in Dr. Anderson's constitutions. Quote, let a man's religion or mode of worship be that it may, he is not excluded from the order, provided he believe in the glorious architect of heaven and earth. At accordance with this principle, Jews were admitted to the Masonic lodges as early as 1724. But English Masonry went further than English ecumenism in pointing that underlying all religions there was a, quote, true primitive universal religion, a religion, quote, in which all men agree. Quote, a Mason is obliged by his tenure to obey the moral law, and if he rightly abstains the art, he will never be a stupid atheist nor an irreligious libertine. But though in ancient times Masons were charged in every country to be of the religion of that country or nation, wherever it was, yet 'tis now thought more expedient only to oblige them to the religion in which all men agree, leaving their particular opinions to themselves, that it be good men and true, or men of honor and honesty, but whatever denominations and persuasions they may be distinguished, whereby Masonry becomes the center of the union and the means of conciliating true friendships among persons that must have remained at a perpetual distance. End quote. A new and extremely deceptive concept was here introduced into the bloodstream of European thought. Quote, the religion which all men agree. There's no such thing. Even if we exclude the stupid atheists and their irreligious libertines, of whom there are very many, we still find men disagreeing radically in about the most fundamental doctrines, whether God is one or one in three or more than three, or whether he is to be identified with nature or distinguished from it, whether he is evolving or changing, whether or not he became incarnate in Jesus Christ, or whether or not he spoke to Muhammad, whether or not he is coming to the judge of the world, etc. Upon the answer to these questions depend our whole concept of right and wrong, and what is, quote, to be good men and true. Far from there being unanimity among, quote, religions, people about this, there are bound to be most radical disagreements. A critical role in development of humanism was played by Rousseau, who insisted man should believe in a, quote, civil religion that combined belief in, quote, the existence of an omnipotent, benevolent divinity that foresees and provides the life to come, the happiness of the just, the punishment of sinners, the sanctity of the social contract and law, and, quote, if any citizen accepted these beliefs, but then, quote, behaved as he did not believe in them, the punishment was death. As Jacques Barzun writes, quote, Rousseau reminds the reader that 2/3 of mankind are neither Christian nor Jews nor Mohammedans, from which it follows that God cannot be exclusive possession of any sect or people. All their ideas as to his demands and his judgments are imaginings. He asks only that we love him and pursue the good. All else we know nothing about. There should be quarrels and bloodshed about what we never know is the greatest impiety. Now, ecumenism may be described as a religious egalitarianism, the doctrine that one religion is as good as any other. When combined, as it was in the lodges of Europe and America, with political and social egalitarianism, the doctrine that one person is good as any other is made for an explosive mixture, not just a philosophy, but a program for revolutionary action. And this revolutionary potential of Masonry became evident very soon as it spread from England to the continent. Although Freemasonry is best known for its catastrophic influence on the French and Russian revolutions, its influence was hardly less profound on the American Revolution and on the whole political and cultural development in America, where the great majority of Masonic lodges are to be found today. Now, there was essentially two kinds of American religion in the 18th century. On the one hand, Masonry of the cultural leaders of the Revolution, who usually belonged to some institutional church, but whose real temple was the lodge, and who, as Karen Armstrong writes, quote, experienced the Revolution as a secular event. And on the other hand, Protestantism on the lower classes. The first Masonic lodges were established in Boston and Philadelphia by 1730. As we have seen, St. Andrew's Lodge in Boston became a, quote, hotbed of sedition at the time of the American Revolution, and several leaders of the American Revolution were Mason, including Benjamin Franklin, master of his lodge in Philadelphia, George Washington, master of the Alexandria Lodge number 22, John Hancock, James Madison, James Monroe, Paul Revere, John Paul Jones, Lafayette. As Neil Ferguson points out, quote, at this point, presidential inauguration on 30th April 1789, Washington swore the oath of the office of the Bible of St. John's Masonic Lodge on number 1 of New York. The oath was administered by Robert Livingston, the Chancellor of New York, the state's highest judicial office, and another Mason indeed of the first Grand Master of the Grand Lodge in New York in 1794. Washington sat for the artist Joseph Williams, who painted him dressed in full Masonic regalia. The president had worn to the level of the cornerstone of the United States Capitol a year before. George Washington's apron deserves to be as famous in the folklore of the American Revolution as Paul Revere's ride, for it seems doubtful that either man would have had the influence he enjoyed had it not been for his membership of the Masonic Brotherhood. Later historians have cast doubt on the Masonic origins of the iconography of the Great Seal of the United States, globally responsible since its incorporation in the $1 bill in 1955. Yet the all-seeing eye of Providence that crowns the unfinished pyramid on the obverse of the seal does closely resemble the eye that gazes at us from the Washington's apron in the 19th century lithographs of the first president of Masonic attire. Quote, The evidence suggests that Freemasonry was at least important in secular political rhetoric of religious doctrines and animating the men who made the revolution. American Masonry was a mixture of English and French Masonry. Rousseau died 2 years before the American Declaration of Independence in 1776. Lafayette represented radical French Masonry, but there was also representatives of more conservative English Masonry, such that of the seven uh, provincial Grand Masters in America, uh, supported George III and condemned revolutionary agitation against the established authority. Moreover, many of the leaders of the British forces were Masons. The movement therefore had the property of spawning, as well as most of the leaders of the revolution, several of the leaders of the counter-revolution. A similar paradox existed in Europe. Thus, the anti-revolutionary Comité d'Altos, I don't know, King Gustav Adolphus III of Sweden were Masons, while the ultra-revolutionary Danton and Robespierre were not. Napoleon was not a Freemason, although he protected it, while the reactionary generals who defeated him, Wellington and Blücher and Kutuzov, were. One reason for this paradoxical phenomenon was the distinction made in a famous speech by Sir Isaiah Bellerin between two concepts of freedom prevailing in 18th century thought. Freedom as a negative concept, that is, freedom from restrictions of various kinds, and a freedom as a positive concept, that is, freedom to do certain things. English liberalism and English Enlightenment, and therefore English Masonry, understood freedom in a negative sense, whereas the French Enlightenment and Rousseau and the Grand Orient of Paris tended to understand it in a positive, that is, revolutionary sense. Many of those who joined the ranks of the Masons were lovers of freedom in the negative sense. When some of them saw how the Rousseauist positive concept of freedom led to Jacobinism and all the honors of the French Revolution, they turned sharply against it. Some still remained members of the lodge, but others broke all links with it. Thus, the Duke of Wellington never entered a lodge after his membership lapsed in 1795, and in 1851 wrote that, quote, he had no recollection of having been admitted a Freemason. Masonry's organizations was decentralized and diffuse, and it had very broad criteria of membership. This meant that a very wide range of people could enter its ranks, but this precluded the degree of control and discipline that was essential for the attainment, and still more important, the retention of supreme political power. Masonry was therefore the ideal kind of organization for this first stage in revolutionary process, the dissemination of revolutionary ideas as quickly as possible, as though as a large portion of a population as possible. Okay, so I'm going to do something very quickly. I'm going to set up something. Just give me one moment.
Here I am. I'm back.
Oh, glad for that, Joe.
Yeah, here we are. Another chapter of The Secret Society Revealed, name of the show. First, want to mention that Revolution Radio is a step in the right direction, mainstream media. From the day William Paley began CBS with the all-seeing eye to Miley Cyrus, I mean, it is a one unified weapon against your mind, and I'm not exaggerating. So you want to stay away from that. Revolution Radio, good step in the right direction. Please support it. Today, we want to talk about the Fabian Society. It's, described as kind of a bugaboo of the right. They see it as, very conspiratorial, involved in a lot of bad stuff. It's a socialist organization, at least purports that it is. It was very influential in the creation of the British Labour Party, and has lots of influential people that come in and out of it. But Jerry, what do you make of the Fabian Society? I know you've been...
Well, you look at the foundation of it, and my take is it looks like a middle-class artist movement at the beginning, literary movement. It grew out of something called the Fellowship of New Life, which was founded by a guy named Davidson, who was a pantheistic archaeologist and who was interested in veganism and all kinds of interesting philosophies. And it sounded like it was just kind of a talking group. And then
Annie Besant was in that.
Yeah, Annie Besant was in it.
The Bizarre Theosophist, which is a bizarre manifestation of Freemasonry.
Yeah. So there were those suspicious connections as well, from the beginning.
Yeah.
But they decided that they wanted to be more politically active, at least some of them. Davidson and others weren't interested in that, so a splinter group was formed called the Fabians. And they were named after this guy, Fabius, who was an ancient Roman warrior.
Yeah.
Who was noted for his care and deliberation in setting up his strikes. He's part of the Carthaginian War.
Yeah, he waged war against the Carthaginians, and his motto was delay and terrorism. The delay part of it, kind of the slow motion stuff, I think is more well known in terms of the Fabian group, though terrorism, you have to wonder about that, because when the Fabians created a logo, they chose the wolf in sheep's clothing. So kind of, well, what the heck, maybe there's something going on here that they don't disclose to the public.
Yeah. Another important early member was Havelock Ellis, who was involved with both the Fellowship of New Life and early on with the Fabians.
Yeah.
And he was a sexologist who was one of the first to study homosexuality and transgender psychology.
Yeah.
And he was also a eugenicist.
Right. It's funny how all those things always wrap together, even though you would think that not necessarily natural strands of thought. But yeah,
of course, eugenicist wasn't being nearly so disreputable then. At least it was thought of as, well, maybe that was a good idea.
Well, at least it wasn't overtly genocidal. People were kind of, they were considering the possibility that this was being presented as, a real concept, even though at this time, 19th century, overpopulation really wasn't some kind of worldwide issue. But, there it was. It then actually, as it becomes Planned Parenthood. And then you end up with the son of the leader of Planned Parenthood being Bill Gates, to seed bank
ironic.
And vaccines.
Yeah, because originally I think they had the idea that they would be controlling the births of Black people, and somehow that was the undesirables that it was targeted at, and it wound up reducing the birth rates of the white folks.
Shocking. The thing is, if you actually trace Planned Parenthood back, it gets kind of ugly, because you do get into racial and kind of genocidal sort of concepts. But in the Fabian Society, what I think is so fascinating, the reason I was kind of curious about it, is because of all of the different people that go in and out of it.
Right away, it got really interesting after it was founded. A guy named Hubert Bland was kind of a key organizer, along with his wife, Edith Nesbitt. Now, he was a former banker who had become a journalist, and his wife, I guess, wrote children's books. And so they, in turn, recruited Bernard Shaw, who was a journalist at the time, who went on to become a playwright. And Shaw, in turn, recruited Sidney Webb. And Webb went on to write the Constitution for the Labor Representation Committee, which became the Labor Party.
Right. Now, Webb, you're into Freemasonry. Webb is, famous as a high-level Freemason and a friend of Annie Besant. He is a bizarre character. He's someone I'd really like to get the DNA of to see what is in back of Webb. But Webb, like in some of our other shows we've talked about on the U.S. side, you've got the influence of cultural Marxism, right? Very destructive to culture here in the United States. Very, very destructive, cultural Marxism. It comes from the Frankfurt School, which comes from Gregor Lukács, who was the guy who ran Hungary following the Bolshevik Revolution. He ran the education component of it. And he developed cultural Marxism, kind of, like saying, well, this direct fighting and, the dialectic of the proletariat warfare. I don't think that's going to happen. We need to take a march through the institutions and take them over. We can get to the same place. So he develops cultural Marxism and has this thing called the Frankfurt School. And then the Frankfurt School then is hired by the American Jewish Committee, and it produces the completely insane and weird authoritarian personality where they talk about a mass scale psychological technique against Gentiles, basically. You and I have discussed it. I'm not sure you kind of accept my reading of the text, but I just assert as a fact that anyone who reads the end of it will, think that's a reasonable thing. And so then you get from there, you're on to the Macy Conference. You're into, from there, MK Ultra, and now you have the modern, pornographic culture. So it's, it's a wavy line, granted, and then the connections are not clear, but at least in the present body of analysis that we suggest as a starting point, at least you can make these connections, and you can end up with some explanation how you go through all these things and what is influencing them. And Jerry, as you know, many people have tried to link Theodor Adorno to Tavistock, and then from there the production of the Beatles songs. You've heard this theory?
I've heard it. Yeah, it's not completely convincing, but it's possible.
I think it's totally unconvincing. I've actually been in communication with some Adorno scholars, guys who actually just study him, academics. And they say, man, there's no way. Adorno was too old, and he was sick during the time this was going on.
So you're saying he was too old and sick to have founded the Beatles?
Well, yeah, that's what I don't know, man. I wasn't there, but I mean, I'm just saying that the guys that I actually have talked to who are students of Adorno, right? A couple of them have both told me this, that makes no sense. And moreover, they say, look, Adorno attended this Tavistock Institute, like many people who are interested in anthropology and psychology did, but there's no way to prove that he was ever kind of some sort of a founding or an employee of Tavistock Institute. So
yeah, I mean, if you read a lot of his stuff, it's very progressive. Whereas if you listen to his music, it doesn't sound anything like the Beatles.
Yeah, I couldn't make any sense. However, I was very suspicious because I had done that decoding of I Am the Walrus, and I said, look, this is just an homage to Freemason victories. You've got every single strand of symbolism all leading to Freemasons and to basically the destruction of the Christians, and so I said, and that's available at Post Flaviana and CaesarsMessiah.com.
Yeah. And the link to Adorno may not be very convincing, but the connection from Freemasonry to Tavistock to the Beatles is a little more so. Do you think?
Little more. I mean, it's plausible, But anyway, the reason why you won't ever guess why I was curious about the Fabians. I was curious about the Fabians because I was looking at another group, the Rolling Stones. And the Rolling Stones, they have this Keith Richards individual who's clearly a secret Freemason. He's got the skull and bone ring, but he also, like on his house, he's created a kind of a pyramid with the all-seeing eye at the top of it. And then there's a documentary about him, and there's just skull and bones all over his home. So he's kind of it looked to me like, well, he's certainly one of these crypto Freemason guys, And then I looked at, I was looking like I was for, I went through and looked at I Am the Walrus. I was looking at Jumpin' Jack Flash, that song by the Rolling Stones. And Camilla Paglia had said, well, this kind of looks like it could be based on The Mental Traveler, William Blake's poem. And The Mental Traveler is to me, it's it's just a Masonic kind of homage to the journey of the Masons through time, one generation after another. I won't bother to go into the decoding of it, but I always had that impression of it. And so when I looked at Jumpin' Jack Flash, I go, yeah, that does seem to be the case. But the Stones, well, how do they form? They've got these stories about Jagger and Richards just running into each other, kind of possible, maybe, a little vague, but there it is. But anyway, Jared, guess what I found? I found that, in fact, they were funded by the London School of Economics. Now, the reason why this is important, why I got back to the Fabians.
Now, why is the London School of Economics funding rock musicians?
Man, it's the only time in history. It kind of reminds me of the scholarship, the Chester Bowles Fellowship that Gloria Steinem got, which is the only one, and then takes her into her career in the CIA. Very suspicious. And the fact is that this is also just very, very suspicious. And it's also been hidden. It came out, there was someone who knew Derek Bell, and she's a kind of a chronicler of the, the counterculture kind of in Britain. Well, she was friends with Derek Bell. And Derek Bell is, among other things, he's Gertrude Stein's nephew. And he's an interesting guy. He was in charge of the dam busting, British Air Force contingent. You've ever seen the movies where they drop these bombs that would roll along the water and smash into dams, and then they would flood all the poor civilians underneath. Well,
oh God, Eugene is a one-bomb city, Joe.
so is mine. Anyway, Derek Bell. Now, Derek Bell she communicated with Derek Bell, and Derek said, "Oh yeah," he goes, during the 1960s, Jagger had supposedly written a proposal to the London School of Economics, and they granted it a business funding for what becomes the Rolling Stones. Now, when I read this, I go, man, what? How is this possible? But then I found out the amazing detail. Derek Bell, after the war, had become one of the board of governors of the London School of Economics. So he's a pretty good source for this kind of information. So that, okay, it's not a, recording, and, but still there it is, so the Adorno Beatles thing just seems, I don't know, but this, first person individual who is, certainly would have known this kind of material, much better provenance. and for conspiracy buffs, and I imagine some people who listen to the show are, the London School of Economics was, of course, it was that bizarre combination that you get over and over again of oligarchs and kind of quasi socialists, right? That are creating it, because the funding for the London School of Economics comes from the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and in fact, the first two heads of the school were both Rothschilds. Lord Rothschild, the kind of famous muck-a-muck guy, and then Lord Rosebery, who was a Rothschild, but the name had gone away. So anyway, this is a much better connection, and this is why, you see, because of the if you then look at the London School of Economics, it's basically just an adjunct of the Fabian Society.
Well, it certainly was founded by the Fabians, though not necessarily identical in the aims.
Yeah, because you got the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers.
But Joe, let me ask you a question. Do you see socialism as an improvement over feudalism?
Well, it depends who runs them. There's
I think so, but
yeah, and in general, I think it's the same thing. I mean, I think the thing about socialism that has made it more catastrophic than feudalism in terms of just raw numbers of fatalities is just because the controlling oligarchs have more technology.
Things are a lot more advanced now, and all population much greater. But I feel that looking at this group that was at the beginning of the Fabians, that they were seeing it as a progressive thing. And that, look at Bernard Shaw as a spokesman. Now, I was a huge fan of Bernard Shaw when I was in high school and college. It kind of helped me work through some of my early stuff, and I don't know in retrospect whether it did a good job or not. But I was a big fan of Major Barbara, which was one of Shaw's.
I mean, Shaw's a Freemason. H.G. Wells, who's also a founding member of Freemason, Besant a Mason. Webb is a very high-level Mason. So I just see this as a Masonic organization that has a cover story, the Workers' Paradise, which we've seen over and over again. And in back of what you're looking for is the acquisition of political control. In other words, as I see history, Jerry, you just have time and time again over the last, say, 200-300 years, you've got the cover story, Workers' Paradise in general.
But Joe, they already had political control. From the feudalist days, they had political control.
Right.
And
the rebranding is just a technique. It's just a way to, people don't recognize that it's just the same old boss. The Who, the Masonic maniacs. They talk about meet the new boss, same as the old boss. That is what you've got here, and that's what I see.
Yeah, but it's still not the same thing exactly. You have. Look at Pygmalion. Look at the story of how the professor there, Dr. Doolittle.
Let's take some time and explain to us the Pygmalion connection into the Fabians.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, Bernard Shaw wrote the play, and it was a new and innovative take on the old Pygmalion myth. The old Pygmalion myth, of course, being that a sculptor sculpted this beautiful woman Pygmalion and then wished that she would become real, and presently she did. In Shaw's case, he imagined Eliza Doolittle as being this Cockney woman who was totally primitive, poverty-stricken person, and he took her in. He teaches her to speak perfect English. She becomes beautifully dressed, and then he wants to marry her. And I think that it's not entirely clear whether he actually does or not, depending on who's telling the Shaw story. I don't know what happened in the play. In all honesty, I only know the story from the movie My Fair Lady.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so I have not seen the Shaw play or read it. But you can see this idea of bringing a person out of poverty and into a position of the middle class by virtue of education, and bringing them up also in terms of their way of life and their state of living.
Yeah, but in the movie, the girl ends up basically, you know, enthralled by the speech guy, and so you can look at it as she's been brought into the middle class, but you could also look at it as well. She's been created as a sex slave, you know, kind of like Pizzagate sort of thing. So you see what I mean? There's two ways.
You can look at it two ways.
Yeah.
And Major Barbara, the story there is that Major Barbara is with the Salvation Army, and she's out on the street preaching, and she's bringing in the poor people, and they're having their way of life bettered by virtue of working with the Salvation Army. They're getting fed, they're getting a little bit of education. And Major Barbara is sort of in love with a man named Adolphus.
Mm-hmm.
And Adolphus is a poor professor of Greek. You know, he's well educated, but he's not doing too well because he's just on a meager professor's salary, if that. He may be freelance for all we know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Dolly and Major Barbara, they're having a courtship, and they have episodes on the side showing the poor people and how dishonorable they are. Basically, they're kind of comic relief in the play. And it turns out that Major Barbara is the daughter of Andrew Undershaft, and he is a manufacturer of armaments. He's sort of like Krupp. And all of this was written before World War I, so really there was not any idea at that point of how death dealing all of these armaments really could be. It was kind of just an amusing thing. And Undershaft is painted as this very progressive businessman who has all these happy workers in his factory. And he gives money to the Salvation Army in a crisis. Salvation Army is about to shut down, and Undershaft comes around and gives them a bunch of money. And oh, by the way, he's matching to a famous whiskey manufacturer. And so Barbara is like, oh my God, the Salvation Army is taking money from pushers of armaments and war, and not only that, but drink and addiction and degradation. What's wrong with you Salvation Army people? And the Salvation Army is like, we're so grateful to get the money. This is great. We love you, Andrew Undershaft. So Major Barbara finally is fed up, and she quits the Salvation Army. And the deal is made that Dolly will marry Major Barbara, and the Undershaft family tradition is that the family fortune has got to go to a foundling. And Dolphus argues by some magic that he really is a foundling, even though his parents are well known to him. And so it winds up that Dolly and Barbara take over the Undershaft arms manufacturing factory and live happily ever after. And,
wow.
And I looked at that, you know, and I said, well, yeah, you know, Barbara and Dolly are right. You can't beat them, so you might as well join them.
There's the thought.
Right. So I went and finished college and became an engineer and kept my nose clean and did not join the Salvation Army.
God, can you believe it? I mean, the whole of civilization just was there, balanced on basically a thread, and fortunately it fell in the right direction.
What, my personal or the entire?
Well, I'm thinking of, you know, just the impact of you.
Got it.
Just saying it was kind of an important moment. So well, anyway, well, so that's, you know, those are interesting strands from the Fabian.
So the point was that, again, you know, it was a movement to upgrade the middle class, you know, and without actually turning the ownership of the means of production over to the proletariat like Marx wanted to do.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing is, personally, I just couldn't be more skeptical of social movements that basically, you know, have recent social movements that have kind of the workers' paradise concept. because they've just all been instrumental in, genocide. So I don't buy them anymore. I think that we've seen enough of this, and so whenever you get the, someone is here to organize, you have to give political power to this narrow group, and then the next thing you know, a lot of people are dying.
Yeah, it seems like the strategy of trying to co-opt the wealthy and convince them to be a little bit different doesn't really work all that well. Now,
yeah, they seem
in the
to
case
be
of the Fabians,
yeah,
in the case of the Fabians, if it was a middle class movement, you can see that they tried to marry up. I mean, Sidney Webb married a woman named Beatrice, who was multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire by today heiress, and Shaw did the same thing. He married into money.
Yeah, I mean, and so did H.G. Wells. But the thing is,
right. So Dolly was sort of a literary example, right? He's somebody else married into money.
I would say that the combination that is the most suspicious is when you get oligarchs participating in quasi-socialism organizations. So when you look at the Fabians, and then you see Rothschild and Rockefeller, right? That's a kind of something that's not well known, but one of the sons goes to Britain and writes his thesis on the Fabians and donates a ton of money to it alongside the Rothschild money that comes in. So there you have the oligarch socialism combination, which is, I think always basically an indicator that you're about to have genocide. And, the purpose is fairly straightforward. It just, they rebrand these movements to create some belief and faith in the system. But the next thing you know, you're walking into automatic weapon fire, as was the case with the Brits. But I just wanted to go on a slight tangent, just because this was sort of interesting, because I was looking at the Beatles, and I realized that the Beatles really aren't directly related to Tavistock in any way that I could make sense of, but they were related to this thing called mass observation. So this is fascinating, because mass observation basically has a lot of individuals who end up in the Fabian Society, but it go back and forth. But it was a mass observation was supposedly a anthropologic survey of British life, and the people who basically brought it forward said it's a science of ourselves. However, among other things, it would pay people money to present to the organization conversations that they'd overheard, anything suspicious. It's kind of like a crude version of the NSA snooping today. But mass observation had, if you trace, again, you have this idea, we're here to try to help people, we're going to learn a lot about ourselves. But then first of all, you get this nefarious strand of anthropology. You've got Jacob Bronowski, who wrote The Ascent of Man, and he ends up in Tavistock, and kind of nefarious sort of character. You can trace him to all these bad things, but clearly he's not someone. This isn't a science of ourselves as it was being presented. So right off the bat, you can see the sophistry. Right, they're telling people, "Hey, it's us. We're not anything. We're just regular guys. We're here, and we're going to study British society." But when you look at the funding, that's when it gets, it becomes clear what's going on, because you get this guy, Lord Simon. Now, Lord Simon of Wythenshawe is a contemporary and friend of the Rothschilds. He's a big eugenicist, right? and all the sterilization programs. And he's also a big media guy. He was a chairman of the BBC. But his protege, right, the guy who actually is underneath him during this period, is a guy he installs as a chairman of the ENI, Joseph Lockwood. And Lockwood is the one who signed the Beatles, and he engaged George Martin with them. Lockwood is a Jewish guy, a homosexual, and it has actually been suggested that one of the reasons that this is, kind of this tangent, but it's been suggested that one of the reasons why the Beatles and EMI were kind of bound together is that Brian Epstein was a Jewish guy and also homosexual. And so he and Lockwood had this kind of bond somehow. This has been, suggested by scholars who look at this. But this is directly, now you have, if you're interested in like, well, how does something like the Beatles come about, and eventually you get the, I Am the Walrus and the triumphant legacy piece of Freemasonry. But here, Jerry, I'm going to read for the first time in this context to the public what I think is actually how the Beatles get going. Here it is. Because when mass observation, this oligarch-funded, anthropologically driven survey of what the British people were made up of got rolling, they realized that it was the dance music world that had so many and so much control over the minds of the people. Dance music world. And so there was a contemporary and an ally, someone who was related to Simon, named Richard Ackland, A-C-L-A-N-D, right? And he was there with the mass observation science and the eugenicist people who were all kind of trying to figure out how to control population. And he noticed that the dance music world was, that had this powerful thing. And so he wrote this. He said, some people in the dance music world, I wonder if it's worth trying to convert any of these ideas and try to get them to express them in dance tunes. I can imagine, for example, an immense popularity for something with the refrain, when are they going to let us build that better world? And then this is in a letter, and he says, do you think I could meet with these people and put this idea to them? I think we could invite 3 or 4 of them to meet with us at the House of Commons for lunch or drinks, the House of Commons. So I when I saw this, I was really charmed by it, because there's obviously, if you take the position that the Beatles were completely artificial, right, that this was just a contrived social phenomena, was leading us to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That this is very, very elaborate and long-standing, mass scale, anthropologic, sociologic kind of, program. Where does the dance music world come from? Well, I think that given Ackland's connections right up into Lockwood, that this is kind of, I think, a pretty good place at least to begin research, because when you look at the expression, when are they going to let us build that better world? And you break it apart, you get some interesting stuff. In other words,
well, it creates the idea of they versus us.
Exactly, yeah, and also of like rebellion. When are they going to let us build that better world? And so Ackland's desire to bring the oligarchs together at the House of Commons and discuss how they could influence the dance music world, I'll bet you, Jerry, that this is part of what ends up with the Beatles.
Well, that lyric almost sounds like the Beatles could have wrote it. No doubt about it.
Yeah. Anyway, it's like.
So
it's like
how did it benefit the oligarchs to put this idea out? I mean, I understand where you're driving at with sex, drugs, and rock and roll and so forth, but the idea that we might build a better world against them,
right?
But
I mean, just because remember, it's like they're controlling. They're trying to basically create a controlled opposition, and they know that there's going to be resistance, so they have to harness this energy. I mean, this is always. I mean, this is like, it's really not that different to me than the technique of promising the workers' paradise. Marx promises the workers' paradise, but you have to give your, control to the Politburo. The Beatles promise the better world, but you have to enter into this, drugged out kind of culture. I think that they both come from the same, perspective. The oligarchs are just very clever as far as how they can harness the rebellion against the insane world that people experience. And so
some of the oligarchs, Joe, might think that the best way to keep control is to spread some of the wealth around.
Well, I like to meet those
spread
guys.
some of the houses.
I think that they do. I think some of them want to spread the wealth around, but I don't think they want to spread the power around. I think that's something.
Yeah, I think, that's really the bottom line. They wouldn't want to spread the power.
Yeah, but I definitely think that some of them want to have, I think it'll be less rebellion if they have a more effective welfare state, or however. I mean, there's different ideas, and I'm sure that you and I've had a million talks about this, both in public and in private, and there's a very wide standard deviation as far as possibility for what's inside the so-called oligarch group. I think we could agree to that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of possibilities, and so I would be surprised if it was just a single point of understanding. I mean, it might be very narrow, but might not be. There might actually be some disagreement as to how to conduct population reduction. But in any case, it is a secret society. We don't get to voice opinions at the meetings where they make these decisions.
Yeah, it seems like for folks like us, the best hope was to marry into it.
Yeah,
we missed our chance.
Yeah, that is always the best hope for it. All right, so you were lucky, but a lot of people aren't. So I'm just kidding. But the thing is, so getting back to the Fabians. Another strand, Jerry, that I find interesting is H.G. Wells, because this small circle of characters then repeats itself. H.G. Wells, his book War of the Worlds, which in my opinion is a representation of kind of the Freemasons' triumph. Using the Book of Revelation. I see the reptile in the pit. He's just talking, kind of typologically about these concepts. And so then, Orson Welles, I don't know if it's any relation, but Orson then brings it out, the Princeton Radio Project. And lo and behold, who's working there but Adorno, and also a guy who name escapes me, but it was an MK Ultra guy. So the small circle, pops up over and over again. And H.G. Wells is there at the founding, or more or less at the founding of the Fabian Society. He's a eugenicist. He's also a social Darwinist. His work then is, pops up in the insane mind control experiment that was War of the Worlds here in the Princeton Radio Project. And then these guys then pop up in MK Ultra, which then is the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. On the other side, we're showing that there is at least, kind of interesting connections between this group, the Fabian Society, London School of Economics, and then the Rolling Stones. So what can you say, Jerry? A lot to keep track of.
Yeah, it all does seem to connect back to the same sorts of places time and time again, and it emphasizes that money is really an important part of access to the mass media.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't seem that likely that I would have been a huge fan of Major Barbara as a kid if it wasn't that Shaw had married into money and been able to be famous that way. Of course, his talent didn't hurt either.
Right. But it's just fascinating how you get these, I don't know, what would you call them, cells, of individuals who are connected into these different social systems, things that influence us. I mean, you think of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and then the Fabian Society.
Yep. They were on the right track there. The Beatles and the Rolling Stone, of course, were far more influential than Bernard Shaw in the end.
Yeah, but it's just that when you see these kinds of connections, it is fascinating. And this is really, in my opinion, it's the thing that people should really spend the most time on, and in your spare time, for whatever my opinion is worth. Study the secret society. Try to understand how it works, who is connected into it, and its sophistry. It's the arguments that it makes, because you can see that it really does dominate our world. I mean, on this side of the pond, we've got cultural Marxism, which, in my opinion, has a huge influence over the culture of our academic world, right? The political correctness, their version of feminism, their version of critical theory of Christian culture. The cultural Marxists, I think, is the strongest force in the universities today. But on the other side of the pond, you've got the influence of education that the Fabians had. It's, I mean, there are different opinions on this, but I think that most people study, certainly the John Taylor Gatto, he feels that the Fabians basically were completely in cross-fertilization with the cultural Marxist. And then he documents how they influenced both the education in Britain and also the education here in the United States. He wrote that as the movement developed, the Fabians became friends and advisors of industrialists and financiers, travelers in the same direction. Then from there, they were able to basically infiltrate our education system. They had a very, like Shaw, for example, he talks about the Fabians just taking over public education. I don't know if you've ever seen any of those quotes, but Shaw was just saying, we should take over all of the British education, and it was basically going to just become something that the Fabians, with the eugenics society and all this stuff would become, in control over. And I'm not sure this was, this is a good idea, because, you get some frightening things when you look at the individuals that they were engaged with. For one thing, like Tavistock. Tavistock's background, do you know where Tavistock came from?
Remind us, Joe.
Well, it came from the Child Guidance Clinic, which was actually just the Jewish World Health Organization. Right. So the Jewish World Health Organization changed its name to the Child Guidance Clinic, and then from there it changed its name to Tavistock. That is a curiosity, because if you look on the other side of the pond and you get where the American Jewish Committee and some of these same individuals then get involved in the Macy Conference, and you see them in MK Ultra, you have to wonder what is going on exactly. I'll give you just one last little bonbon. Something I found just a while ago. One of the guys who is actually in this mass observation, which, you know, has this weird link into the Beatles, was Peter Roper, psychiatrist. He wrote The Use of Hypnotism in the Treatment of Exhibitionism, and was basically one of the so-called, you know, the science of ourselves. They say it's that, but then you get these technical people who are actually running it. Well, do you know who Roper worked with?
Go for it, Joe.
Ewan Cameron.
Ah.
So now the little circle of weird things is almost complete, because
yeah, you know, I'm really dubious about, you know, guilt by association, but you gotta wonder in particular if somebody affiliates with somebody like Ewan Cameron.
Look,
you know, what exactly did he know about what Ewan Cameron was doing?
I know, and that's the thing, and particularly psychiatrists, because and it is alleged, and I can at least give you the, you know, some scholarship to this effect, that when Cameron died in '67, Roper is the one who actually took over the work. In other words, he actually conducted these kinds of, you know, really sadistic, insane mind control experiments at universities that were basically just continuation of Cameron's work. You know, I don't, as it's impossible to get, I don't have citations that I'm, you know, will say this is exhaustive. You know, this is the only thing the only way you can look at it. But man, I've got some pretty interesting documentation that Roper is basically the Ewan Cameron, you know, protege, takes over it. And he is part of mass observation. So what the heck, Jerry? It looks like there's this small little secret society that is kind of involved in all this stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting how many specifically Freemasons you've been able to identify in all this.
Yeah, that's right. You have if I would say, like, you have you know, financiers, right? A lot of Jewish kind of anthropology, psychology guys, like the certainly the Frankfurt School, right? And then from Tavistock, you know, you have you have just a ton of these Jewish psychiatrists, psychologists, and things. And somehow all of these different groups are able to blend together. You know, the oligarchs, government intelligence, the Freemason, Jewish kind of anthropologic science. Now, you know, one can say, well, you know, there's employment issues, and there's just, you know, they just create the structure where, you know, one group can fund or have a relationship to the other. One group is manipulating the other. That's a possibility, but there could be some kind of organizing principle that they share.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I'm looking at this picture of the wolf in sheep's clothing coat of arms of the Fabian Society, and it is a little scary. You know, the wolf looks pretty scary, and the sheep looks
remember, you know, the Freemasons seem to have this kind of idea about destroying Christianity. That's why a dead sheep is, like, symbolically a little bit curious, and you know, maybe deserves a little more attention. So the Fabian,
yeah, and that idea of destroying Christianity, you know, on the one hand, we could be accused of the same thing, and on the other hand, maybe there could be some kind of values that are of some worth.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value to it. But I mean, it just depends on how they want to do it, what the purposes are. You know, I mean, like, you and I want to take people into a perfect world where there is no hunger or fear, where there is no wealth or poverty, where all people are
right.
joined.
Well, this is the contradiction, Joe. As long as we can keep post-Flaviana small, you know, we can keep it pure, but the minute we become successful and famous, we'll get co-opted, right?
But already
we'll have Freemasons joining us. And
are you kidding? We'll be joining the Masons. But, you know, so the thing is, you know, this hopefully is of value to the listeners, because I put out a request on another show I was on for, some help with this, and was just astounded at how much technical information came forward. I mean, I actually got approached by two guys who are writing books about Adorno, and they had an understanding of Adorno that was really amazing. And they convinced me separately in different strands of communication that Adorno wasn't writing this stuff. He was too sick. He was sick and this one guy was saying, look, this is his workload at the time when people are supposedly he's writing this, and he's way too busy. He can't even get this other stuff done, stuff he's been working on for years and years. He's really sick, and there's no way he could be coming up with the Beatles stuff. The only real connection is that it had a kind of there was some kind of tonal parallelism between what Adorno had written about and then some of the Beatles songs. But man, that is such a weak thread, right? And so, because you could easily anybody could use this kind of format for music. And so anyway, they convinced me that Adorno wasn't useful. And so I would just like to put it out again. Anybody that has more connections into either the Stones and London School of Economics, or the mass observation from to Lockwood and into the Beatles, please, my email address is joeatwell@gmail.com, and you can just send me that information, and I'll be grateful for it, and I'll try to pass it along.
Yeah. Now, I'm looking at this picture of wolf in sheep's clothing at Wikipedia, by the way, and you might be interested to know that Wikipedia does not have an article on cultural Marxism.
Why? Why not?
Well, there was a gigantic political battle over that a few years ago, and it was deleted.
Like it doesn't exist?
Yeah. Well, there's a redirect now. If you type cultural Marxism into Wikipedia, you'll be redirected to Frankfurt School conspiracy theory.
Okay. Well, the thing is, it's a pejorative. I can understand why they wouldn't want that title, but I do think it certainly describes something that's real.
Yeah. Well, there's a debate right now to bring that article back.
Are you involved with it?
Well, I've voted in favor, of course.
Yeah. I mean, let's have the argument anyway. I don't know. I think it's good to have that kind of Wikipedia, filter, but you've got to be careful. If it isn't used properly, you end up with censorship.
Yeah, well, of course, conspiracy theory is kind of a dirty word at Wikipedia and in most circles, whereas I'm like, hey, it's a theory about conspiracy. Conspiracies exist. Right. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, certainly. So, that's just being clear-minded. So, next week, what do you think we're going to talk about, sir? Oh, wow. We'll have to come up with that by Tuesday. All right. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening. Thank you, Jerry. Talk to everyone next week. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.